Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our three-part Global Symposium series with Dr. Michael Jakowec speaking for us today on the impact of exercise on cognition in Parkinson's disease. My name is Alana Dillon. I'm an Education and Support Services Coordinator at Parkinson's Society, BC, and I'll be facilitating our webinar today. Before I introduce Dr. Jakowec, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items with you. First, I want to let you know that we are recording this webinar and it, along with the presentation slides, will be available on our website. Secondly, you will see a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Click on that icon to open it up and feel free to use this chat box during the webinar to make any comments or questions on today's presentation topic. And the questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. And finally, to optimize your experience with this webinar, please ensure that you adjust your speaker volume both on your computer as well as on your actual speaker so that you can hear the webinar well. It's my pleasure to now introduce Dr. Michael Jakowec. We are very fortunate to have him speak for us today. Michael Jakowec, PhD, is a professor in the Department of Neurology at University of Southern California. His background is in molecular biology and biophysics and their application to neuroscience. Studies in the lab are involved in understanding the mechanisms by which molecular and pharmacological interventions, including exercise, alter synaptic structure and connectivity in the brain of animal models of Parkinson's disease. Research in the lab utilizes a wide spectrum of approaches from animal behavior, microscopy, molecular biology of gene and protein expression, cell culture, and imaging. For the past 20 years, in addition to running an active research lab, he has been actively involved in teaching several undergraduate classes, including most recently neuropharmacology in health and disease, as part of the new major in the pharmacology undergraduate program. Dr. Jakowec, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'll pass it over to you now.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Alana, for your invitation. And I want to thank everybody in the Parkinson Society of British Columbia for their interest. It's always nice to get out of the lab and discuss with you what we're doing in the lab and why we're doing it. And the reason we do it is because of the patients. I mean, that's the driving force of why we do this type of research. And before I start, I really just want to say that what I'm going to try to do is to kind of integrate a wide spectrum of different aspects of the research. And really, while it's focused on Parkinson's disease and the impact of exercise, I want to begin to really kind of give you a reasoning and interest and rationale and evidence for why things like physical activity are so important for learning and for cognition. I won't have time to speak much on diet. I'll mention maybe a couple of slides at the end, or if somebody has some specific questions, happy to address them. But we'll talk about fitness and motor control, but really bring it all down to neuroplasticity and synaptogenesis, and ultimately changes in behavior, changes in cognitive behavior and changes in motor behavior. And most importantly, how it impacts the Parkinson's community, whether that be patients and caregivers and their families, and really begin to emphasize and show you why things are what they are and the underlying really molecular mechanisms that are involved in these different processes. And so that's really the goal of what I'd like to do. So this is often used as the final slide, but I'm going to use it as my first slide. And my first slide is really to thank the group that I'm part of. And I'm part of a large team. Dr. Giselle Petzinger and I lead a large team of individuals and a remarkable group of talented physicians and clinicians and lab researchers and students. And so Giselle and I, over the last 25 years or so, have been working together in trying to understand the underlying mechanisms of exercise in the context of Parkinson's, and how what we find in the laboratory can impact what goes on in the clinic and what goes on in the community, basically to translate this information. And then at the same time, take what is in the clinic and bring it back to the laboratory so we can test some very, very specific questions regarding mechanisms and things of that particular nature, and try to understand how the brain is in fact reacting and doing what it does. And so I'll probably throw a lot of data at you, but I'm going to try to highlight the take-home lessons And if you have some very specific questions, just throw them in the chat, and we'll talk about them afterwards. And I'm happy to have you email us and ask any specific questions. So absolutely fine. So what we want to highlight today is really the effects of exercise on the brain, and understanding the new ways in which dopamine is utilized. We used to think of exercise as simply enhancing the amount of dopamine in the brain, and that was the basis of the recovery. In fact, that's not true at all. And what really happens is that the brain finds a new way to solve a problem. And I'll introduce you that problem and kind of give you a little bit of a feeling of why we have a brain, and our brain and how it's designed to move us through space. And that the movement through space, the walking, the running, is actually a very cognitive process. And in fact, cognition and motor behavior go hand in hand in Parkinson's disease. And in fact, Parkinson's disease is the second most common reason for cognitive dysfunction after Alzheimer's disease. And in terms of its importance, it's extremely important. And what we try to do in terms of developing exercise programs is to begin to target cognition. And when you can target cognition, control cognition, and enhance cognition, you can enhance motor behavior. And the same thing with motor behavior back on cognition. The two work hand in hand and are highly synergistic. And I'll show you some evidence for that. And we'll look at basically how exercise enhances neuroplasticity, how exercise can create new connections in the brain. And a couple of new terms for you are neuroplasticity and synaptogenesis. Neuroplasticity is brain change, and synaptic plasticity or synaptogenesis is changes in connections in the brain. And these changes in connections and changes in the brain structure lead to new circuits, and new circuits lead to new behaviors. And these new behaviors, we hope, are those that restore some of the behavioral functions that are lost in Parkinson's disease. We can't claim a cure at this point. This is not a cure. Exercise is not a cure. It's a way to control much of the symptomology. It probably alters disease progression, and certainly those patients who exercise intensely find greater benefit, greater quality of life, and may modify disease progression. But we haven't yet cured it. We need to figure out what it is that we're going after in terms of the changes in the context of Parkinson's disease. So what we'll also look at is a bit of the connection between cognition and exercise, and that physical activity really preserves cognitive health. And we have a lot of evidence in this right now. And that, in fact, we can develop types and forms of exercise, because I know one of the biggest questions patients have is to their doctors or their caregivers is, what's the best exercise? What kind of exercise should I do? Well, we've, over the last 20 years, have been thinking about this problem, and really comes down to picking a type of exercise that really targets your cognitive circuits. And I'll show you some examples of that. And also to make your exercise or physical activity, we can mention in the context of our movement as physical activity, to make it a learning modality, learn new things. And in fact, this becomes very, very important. And in fact, maybe the underlying mechanisms of why the benefits of exercise are occurring. I'll mention a couple of other exciting avenues in the laboratory. We've had a graduate student, Erin Donahue, in the lab, who has been spending time on the glymphatic system, and there's some really interesting imaging and that she's been doing, and looking at changes in how the brain is structured. And also recently is our interest in astrocytes. Astrocytes are not neurons. They're one of the other types of cells that are in your brain. In fact, they outnumber the number of neurons in your brain. And we used to think of them as simply part of the structure, the architecture of the brain. They kind of just were the scaffolding of the brain. But in fact, they're turning out to be an extremely important target for therapeutics. We understand that they can be dysfunctional. In fact, they may be the cause of many of our diseases of the brain. And so we can look at astrocytes as a potential mechanism for controlling and maybe targeting and improving brain health. And I'll see if I can get to some of that. So often, let's see if this will work. My videos sometimes fail on me, but I often end with this particular video. But I'm going to start with it because I think it's really encouraging. And it's encouraging because it shows Bernie as a typical Parkinson's patient. And in fact, he is showing all the signs of Parkinson's disease. You'll notice the freezing when he gets to the linoleum carpet intersection there. And in fact, we can begin to, so get the sound off. You can see all the hallmarks, the gait, the arm swing, using the cane, the shuffling gait, all those types of features, very, very typical of Parkinson's disease. Let's look at this patient on the right. Patient on the right, the Parkinson's symptoms look much greatly reduced. His gait seems excellent. There's no cane. He's walking with determination. He's turning without shuffling, all of these types of things. This is the same patient. This is Bernie before and after an intensive physical therapy program. It does not cure the disease, but it certainly impacts mobility, impacts his motor behavior, impacts his quality of life, and certainly impacts his cognition. And we can certainly see these in our patients. That's what we'd like to achieve. This is what we'd like to alter in the course of the disease. And in the laboratory, we want to understand why. Why does this happen? And in fact, can we take by understanding what goes on in the laboratory and then bring it into the clinic? And that's exactly what we're going to try to do. The concept of Parkinson's disease and exercise is not new. There's about 60 years of epidemiological studies that have shown that, in fact, exercise can be protective for Parkinson's disease, for Alzheimer's disease, dementias, a number of different diseases in a population. It doesn't stop it for everybody, but from a population point of view, it greatly reduces the amount of Parkinson's disease in that particular population. We need to understand why. So we know that exercise can reduce the onset of Parkinson's, but can exercise actually restore motor behavior? Because obviously patients come to the clinic when they have symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And we can't say to them, well, you should have exercised 30 years ago and maybe you'll be more protective. That's not a fair criticism. And in fact, we'd like to know if we could use exercise as a means to restore motor behavior. And in fact, how do we do that? Well, 25 years ago, and it seems like a long time, we had a physical therapist in the laboratory by the name of Beth Fisher, and she came to the lab and she says, what if you took your little mice that I know that you can make them Parkinsonian because you give them a specific drug called MPTP, and they become little mice with Parkinson's disease. They become slow and they show a number of features. They have the same pathophysiologies that we see in the human disease. What if we were to begin exercise them after you gave them Parkinson's? And actually our design 25 years ago was very unique in the sense that we didn't use exercise as protective, such as you think of in the epidemiological studies, but in fact, a week after they were Parkinsonian, a week after all the cell death is completed, a week after they became diseased, we then began to intervene with exercise. And in fact, we then looked at this as a means to look at the interactions of exercise as a restorative property and as a restorative factor. And that's exactly what we did. And in fact, let's see if this video goes. That video doesn't, that's okay. So we put them on treadmills and we run them on treadmills. And when you run the little mice on treadmills, the ones that are exercising do really well. The Parkinsonian mice that do not exercise do not do well. And so we looked at a whole bunch of different features of their behavior, and we saw that there was the restoration of their motor behavior. They got better motorically, just what you'd expect in the context of physical therapy. If you go to a physical therapist and they put you onto treadmills to help your knees and hips, and you'll get better. In fact, these mice did get better. The question then arose is, why did they get better? And people at the time, this is about 2001, 2002, everybody thought that you got better because you made more dopamine. And in fact, if I were to look at the brains of those two previous mice, and in fact, one set of mice that is motorically dysfunctional, they're still Parkinsonian. And in fact, when we look at the amount of dopamine in their brain and compare those animals that are Parkinsonian with no exercise, comparing those with that were Parkinsonian but had exercise, and indicated by these red arrows, the levels of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that is lost in Parkinson's disease, is actually equal. So there was no restoration of dopamine. And this was very difficult to explain because at the time, the central dogma of Parkinson's is you lose dopamine, you have Parkinson's. You reverse Parkinson's and motor behavior, you put back dopamine. This is what our animal models showed us. This is why you take Cinnamate, all those types of features. So we did another experiment. We looked at and asked, well, you don't have the animals don't have more dopamine, but they seem to maybe use what little dopamine they have differently. And so we used an advanced electrophysiological approach called cyclic voltammetry. And this voltammetry method measures the amount of release of dopamine. So you stick a little probe in the brain of the mouse and you exercise it and you just ask how much dopamine comes out. And what we found was, even though there was not an increase in the total amount of brain dopamine, there was a big difference in the amount of dopamine that was released. In other words, there's less dopamine, but it's working harder. And in fact, what we found was that there was more dopamine, what little you had, being released, but it was also staying in the junction, in the synapse, a lot longer. And it was beginning to interact and do its thing. So it's basically having fewer amounts of dopamine, but yet it working harder. I guess you could think of it almost like hockey overtime, 3-on-3, a lot less guys, but they're working harder to score goals. And that's exactly what the brain does. It uses less dopamine, but in fact uses it in a way that restores almost normal neurotransmission. We saw a whole series of different changes also. We saw changes in the dopamine receptors themselves, especially the D2 receptor, which is fundamental to learning, motor learning and memory and things of that nature. It's a very, very important receptor in the brain. And in fact, with exercise, and you can see the little red dots over here on a normal mouse, and with the Parkinsonian mice, we lose the red dots because there's no more dopamine, no more D2 left. But yet when we exercise, we elevate the expression of the D2 receptors. And you can see that in these little red dots through the middle of the brain. So in fact, not only are we using what little dopamine we have better, but the mice are actually increasing the receptors, the other side of the interaction. So it's almost like they're beginning to interact with and use dopamine in a different way. And as I tell my patients, and people ask, well, who gives a rat's ass about a mouse? Nobody. The most important thing is, can we translate this to human? Does the human brain do something similar? And lo and behold, it does. So if we look, and you can see at the very bottom here in this co-localization of MRI with PET imaging, that we can see this redness, which is actually an increase in the amount of the D2 receptor. So the human brain is actually, again, reflecting the molecular changes that we see in the brain in terms of the dopamine receptors. And in fact, this will be published over 10 years ago. And in fact, just about a year or two ago, Dr. Stossel and the group at UBC replicated this finding in humans, and showing that humans who exercise don't get more dopamine, but they use it differently. And we were really, really happy about that finding. And that's why I'm really happy about talking to UBC, because you've got some really good people there that support our work that we did decades ago. And in fact, becomes very, very important. And so we're very, very, very happy about this result. So the brain has found a new way to solve a problem. It is relearning motor behavior. It's using less dopamine, but having a bunch of molecular tricks that make it seem like the levels go back. I wouldn't say back to normal, but neurotransmission restores. This is what we call neuroplasticity. This is brain change. This is changes in the number of connections and changes in the context of connections within the brain. And what's really remarkable here, this is not neurogenesis. And something that Dr. Petzinger always stresses to patients and to people when we talk about this work, this is not neurogenesis. This is not the birth of new neurons. This is the birth of new connections of already existing neurons. And those of us who are having less neurons year to year are very happy with that, because we can use what fewer neurons we have and maybe use them in a better way to create new connections, to find new routes, to solve problems that restore motor behavior and cognitive behavior. And that's, I think, is very, very exciting. And the evidence is synaptogenesis, not neurogenesis. In the hippocampus, another part of the brain that's involved in memory and learning, this is what's altered in Alzheimer's disease, you see neurogenesis, because that's a part of the brain that has neurogenesis, and exercise actually enhances that. But that's not the reason for the solution that we have in the basal ganglia and in circuits within the brain, the cortex, the cerebral cortex, that are being altered by exercise. So again, it's synaptic change, changes in connections, not the birth of new neurons. And I think that's really important, because that means it's within the, it's a target. Maybe it's a reachable. If we can stop Parkinson's, if we can enhance these connections through lifestyle and exercise, that maybe we can restore. And I think this is a very, very promising avenue. And in fact, I think it's extremely important. Really, I think underlies a lot of the reasons that we see that in the context of the success of exercise in the context of Parkinson's. This is a very old picture. This is an old-fashioned picture. This is a picture that everybody sees when they first think about Parkinson's disease. And sometimes you actually see this particular picture. Parkinson's disease is the loss of the neurons of the substantia nigra pars compacta, those neurons that make dopamine, because they then project the dopamine through their axons, through these circuits up into the basal ganglia, the caudate and the putamen, and that's where they deliver dopamine. This connection, this delivery of dopamine is lost in Parkinson's disease. And that was thought to be what's broken. And in fact, the past, oh my gosh, 70 years, 50 years of 60 years of Parkinson's research has been, Parkinson's therapy has been to put back dopamine. A lot of the research in the labs, many labs except ours, has been to restore dopamine neurons. And in fact, this is something that I think has not been extremely successful. And the fact that we don't have new therapeutics or a cure for the disease, but in fact that maybe there are other types of targets that may be very important. There are other things happening in Parkinson's that are very, very important. And this is one of them. And this is one of the, I think this is a really important slide. This is something that Giselle Petzinger devised years ago, and it's in a review article from 2013 that we published. But basically, when we think about dopamine, we now think not only of the connections between the substantia nigra pars compacta and the basal ganglia, but we think about all of these other connections. Because if you simply ask, how much dopamine is in your brain and where's it going? Well, how's it connected? And in fact, there's a tremendous amount of connections, yes, to the basal ganglia, which is responsible for a lot of the motor aspects of us, our movement, but also it makes a lot of connections into the frontal cortex. And we began to see this and think about this 15 years ago. We began to, Giselle said, I think that maybe cognition could be very important. And I think that cognition, not only is cognition a potential deficit in Parkinson's, because we do know that 40 to 60% of patients that are diagnosed with Parkinson's have some kind of mild cognitive impairment, not dementia yet, but certainly have some kind of cognitive impairment. And in fact, these connections may be important because that may say to us, if we can increase the motor function of the brain, maybe we can also influence the cognitive parts of the brain. If we can make you move better, maybe you can think better. And if you think better, maybe you can move better. And that's one of the take-home lessons I'd like to share with you is that's true. That seems to be absolutely true. And in fact, when we think about Parkinson's, you think of the cardinal motor, begin to think of all the other cognitive deficits that are present. For example, the loss of automaticity. The automatic movements that we have. Many patients now have to say, well, I have to think about walking. I have to think about going up the steps. I have to think about going from carpet to linoleum. I have to actively think about this. And this becomes a conscious effort that they must go through. And it's very, very fatiguing, and in fact may interfere with all the other things of cognition, like language, like executive function, visual spatial processing. Things like this are also, which we don't typically think of motor, but in fact are very, very important aspects of Parkinson's disease. And a lot of other features, cognition, the type of cognitive overloading, the fatiguing you may go through, this could lead to things like maladaptive neuroplasticity, you may compensate that, and deficits in a number of other features. So basically, Parkinson's disease is a disease of both motor and cognitive functions in the brain. And is very important in that respect. What we'd like to think about is in the context of, I already mentioned to you that the brain has this amazing capacity of neuroplasticity, it can change, and that there are a number of responses to change. In fact, one of the things that we sometimes think about in terms of this compensation, sometimes also called resilience. Resilience is also something that may be part of the disease progress. We don't know exactly when Parkinson's starts. Some people say it's a year before you're diagnosed, a decade before you're diagnosed, 2 decades before you're diagnosed. Maybe you're even born with it. And then in fact, because of how your brain compensates or how your brain has resilience to Parkinson's may dictate whether it shows up or not. Does it show up at 37, 47, 67, or 87? These are the types of things. And in fact, this whole idea of compensation and resilience are really influenced by lifestyle, which is really quite remarkable. And in fact, exercise is one of them. And so exercise can actually begin to bring out in some of these compensatory mechanisms. And I'll show you a little bit of that we've been able to look at from a molecular point of view, the changes that occur within the brain, really quite remarkable, in fact, and I think really exciting potential therapeutic that we're very excited about. So one of my slides got turned into, I had some really great art there, and it got deleted when I uploaded my slides. I don't know what happened, but is Parkinson's a synaptic disease? Is Parkinson's and synaptogenesis fundamentally important to disease progression, as well as fundamentally important to possibly finding therapeutic modalities? And we have evidence for it. So this is just a cartoon version of what a synapse is. A synapse is a connection between two neurons, and this could be a neuron coming from the substantia nigra pars compacta, and it's carrying dopamine, and it's making contacts to neurons within the basal ganglia. And this is a form of communication that exists in the context of Parkinson's. The idea of plasticity is not new. There's a lot of old guys from hundreds of years ago who thought about this, and it was actually a very exciting aspect of physiology and neuroscience and neurology. And then it was kind of like forgotten for about 100 years. And now it's just been rediscovered. And I think, I like to think that the work that we've been doing has really began to reignite our interest in neuroplasticity and beginning to look at how brains can change in response. So those of you who don't believe me, here's some quotes. You all know about Donald Hebb, famous Canadian neurologist. He worked in Montreal. And he was one of the first people to bring up this concept of neuroplasticity. Another famous person who also, let's say, invented the concept of neuroplasticity was Jerzy Konarski from Poland. Unfortunately, a lot of his work was published in Russian, and so the Western world didn't read it, and so he was kind of forgotten until just recently. But both of them came up with this concept about almost the same time, 1945, 1946, when an axon of cell A, when two cells work hard together, basically, when they work hard together, there are changes that occur in one and the other, such that those connections, which originally were kind of weak, but because of driving them, they become strengthened. And they can become strengthened and they can become permanent. They can become new connections. This is learning. This is memory. This is motor function. This is synaptogenesis. This is new connections within the brain. And this is exactly what we're trying to understand. The other thing that was really important and something that drives a lot of my thinking is this work by Walter Cannon back in the 1920s. And Walter Cannon was in Boston, and he came up with this idea of homeostasis, that the brain has a normal state that it always wants to be in. But in fact, it's not like a computer. It's not stagnant. It's not welded into one position and soldered like a computer. And in fact, it's always changing. And he came up with this concept, and another colleague of ours, Kelvin Davies, introduced this concept of reactive homeostasis. That in fact, what's really remarkable is that the brain maintains its stability only if it is excitable and capable of modifying itself according to external stimuli, exercise, and adjusting its response to the stimulation, a reactive homeostatic response. In a sense, the brain is stable in terms of your behaviors like motor and thinking because it is modifiable, because it's always changing. And this is really remarkable because it reveals to us a lot of the underlying mechanisms of the brain, and in fact is quite an exciting avenue because it shows us the brain is constantly changing, constantly responding to its environment, and therefore is potentially alterable in a way that we would like to guide. And that's exactly what I think exercise and physical activity do. Cahill even saw it. Our famous neuroanatomist from the 1890s saw it, but he early in his career said, the brain doesn't change. It's immutable and nothing regenerates. It's just you got it. And if you don't, if you lose it, you're done with. But in fact, before he passed away in the 1930s, he changed. He had a revelation, maybe on his deathbed, that in fact the brain itself does not obey the imminent and fatal tendency of its hereditary, that it's not just its structure, but it depends entirely on its physical and chemical circumstances present in the environment. That in fact, what it does, what you do, influences that brain. And again, neuroplasticity, synaptogenesis, in fact, making new connections within the brain. This is what the brain is meant to do. And we can see it in the lab. So we can look at a normal brain. This is a neuron from the basal ganglia. And we can look at it in the context of MPTP, which is our neurotoxin model of Parkinson's disease. It kind of shrivels up and loses a lot of its structure. But with exercise, it comes back. And in fact, you can get this restoration. This has been replicated by a number of different laboratories at this particular point. But a decade and a half ago, one of our graduate students actually saw this occurring, and so it became very, very important. So what I'd also like to share with you is this whole idea of cognition. We've been talking motor. We think of motor in the context of Parkinson's as the main feature, but I want to introduce this concept of cognition and thinking and how the two are so intertwined and so important. And just to let you know that probably about 5 to 7 million years ago, that in fact, the most remarkable computational model took place in terms of, someone's knocking at the door, but excuse us, occurred. The transition from walking on all fours to walking on 2 feet. And this was a computational event that took place that involved the evolution of a remarkable part of our brains. And this is the prefrontal cortex. And in fact, we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the front third of the brain. And it's probably one of the only parts of the brain that's actually completely unique to humans. And in fact, it's very, very small in other animals. And what's remarkable about this, it's also the site of magnificent neuroplasticity. It's constantly changing. And in fact, it's the region of the brain that matures the slowest. And in fact, it's not until almost 30 years of age that in fact it matures. And this is why our adolescents are making so many bad decisions. It's also the center for problem solving. It's a center for skill learning, the center for automaticity. And in fact, it works with the motor system in order to control the motoric movements. Things like simple walking and running is really the simultaneous control of over 600 muscles. Those that you need to run and walk, and those that you need to not work, allow you to run and walk, to move and to control your center of gravity, and also to think about where you're going. Every step you make is an incredibly complex cognitive event. That the amount of thinking that goes on is really, really quite remarkable. No computer matches this type of thinking that goes on. For most of us, it's automatic. In the context of Parkinson's disease, you actually may lose this automaticity, and you have to think about all these particular movements. And in fact, as we begin to develop more and more skills, not only walking and running, but soccer and skateboarding and gymnastics and things of that nature, with these particular motor skills, they become a highly cognitive skills. I mean, think about how engaging you have to be in terms of learning a new skill, whether it's basketball or learning to skate and have a hockey stick at the same time, doing gymnastics, things of that particular nature. And hopefully with skill, these motor skills become automatic skills. And that's really, really what the prefrontal cortex does for us. The cerebral cortex, the prefrontal cortex, that front 1/3 of your brain evolved to allow the control of bipedal locomotion. Walking on 2 legs, highly demanding, requires a tremendous amount of computational power. This is what the link is between motor behavior and cognition, that in fact, this computer runs the machine. If you want to think about the computer of the PFC running the machine of motor behavior of the basal ganglia. Cognition, thinking, makes motor behavior automatic, make the automaticity. Deficits in cognition can create deficits in motor behavior because of cognitive load, some of which could be maladaptive or not. Parkinson's disease is as much a disorder of cognition as it is a disorder of the motor behavior. The two systems are extremely intertwined with each other. What's cognition? Somebody might be thinking, well, or I hope you're thinking, because that's cognition. Cognition is really the set of all mental abilities and processes related to knowledge, attention, memory, working memory, judgment, evaluation, reasoning, computational, problem solving, decision making, comprehension and language, executive function, cognitive flexibility, all these things that make us uniquely human and also help us to move through space. And that's really what the prefrontal cortex is doing. It's solving the problem of moving your body through space so that you're not tripping and falling and bumping into walls, and you have goals like, I know where to go, I know where to catch food, I know where to find shelter, I know where to find a mate, I know all these types of things. This becomes very, very, very important. And that's what cognition. And this diagram here just shows us some of those different domains. We think of cognition as having multiple domains, 5 or 6 domains. Those are involved in visual, spatial, language, memory, attention, executive function, and actually something that's very important, that's as important of exercise. And again, take-home lesson is that social interactions are extremely cognitive, and social interactions are extremely important to brain health. And when you aren't exercising, you should be socializing. And when you're not socializing or exercising, you should be sleeping. And if you're not sleeping, you should be eating well. And if you can control those factors of lifestyle, you can have absolutely remarkable benefits from them. Another big question, patients are often asking, what is the best form of exercise? What type of exercise should I do? Should I do aerobic exercise or should I do skilled exercise? Should I do exercise, should I play badminton or should I walk on a treadmill? What should I do? Should I do Tai Chi or should I do tango? Should I do the Argentinian box trot? Should I, what do I do? Well, let me tell you what you should do, because you can look at particular factors. We can look at the brain in the context of exercise. And one of the things that we've done in the lab, and this is in collaboration with a close colleague, Daniel Holschneider and Zhi Wang in our group, is to ask the simple question, is there a difference between forms of exercise that are cognitive versus those that are aerobic? Does one form engage the brain or another? Or, as some people believe, does exercise just change the whole brain? Is it the magic pixie dust that just makes the brain better? And in fact, or do we have to guide it? Do we have to tell it what to do? And yes, we have to tell it what to do. And you can actually engage different circuits by different forms of exercise. So if you want to improve cognition, let's engage thinking in your exercise. And how can we actually prove that? One of the ways we prove that is in the rat, in these Parkinsonian rats. In fact, we can take two rats, both rats have Parkinson's disease because of a toxin we give them. So they're slow and they've got Parkinson's. And we can put them on a very simple wheel where they can just walk along this tread and it's nice and smooth. They don't have to think about it. It's sort of like being on a treadmill at the fitness place and watching the TV and kind of doing a little walk. Your brain doesn't have to be engaged at all. You don't even need a brain to do this. You just move your legs and you just walk. Okay, that's nice. At least you're not eating Cheetos. However, if we put the rats on this complex wheel, and in fact, this wheel, as you can see, some of these rungs are missing, and some of these rungs are kind of like in an irregular pattern, that in fact, if we were to put the rat in this type of environment, it's now having to think about what it's doing. It has to think about every step, and it has to think of how not to fall and how not to get stuck. So it begins to engage its brain. And in fact, if we were to look at its brain using a type of neuroimaging, not unlike imaging in the human brain, we can do something similar in the rat brain. And if we look at the simple exercise, not a lot of engagement of the thinking part of the brain. However, in the brain of a Parkinsonian rat that has cognitively engaged, cognitively challenged, it has to think about what it's doing, you see this tremendous increase in the amount of reaction, of engagement of its thinking part of its brain. It's cognitively engaged. Are there any benefits to this other than seeing these things light up? Yes, there are. In fact, we can ask these mice and rats to do different types of features. And one of them is the nose poke. Some of you have heard about this. We can actually train mice and rats to poke their little noses into a light, and this light will then give them a treat, and they get the treat. So they learn this and they go, wow, I can, by doing this little task, I can get a treat. And they learn that. But then we can fool them, and we can fool them by changing the rules. This is called cognitive flexibility. It's sort of like if someone changes the position of the refrigerator in your kitchen, it takes you a couple of days to learn where it is, because you're automatically always going to one area in the kitchen and, oh, the fridge is over there now, let me move there. We can do this type of cognitive trick in animals and just ask, how fast do they recover? And in fact, animals that are cognitively impaired, that show a lot of deficits, when we re-challenge them, and in fact, you can see the differences between these different groups of animals. And just to make a long story short, animals that are cognitively impaired who go through a form of exercise that is cognitively engaging show improvement in their thinking. Not only is there improvement in their motor, they're getting stronger because they're on the treadmill, they're getting stronger in their thinking. And we can see this in our animal models. And we can see this by using a lot of different techniques, and we can have the molecular evidence of it. And just to really throw something interesting at you, we also can see that there is tremendous amount of restructuring. Yes, there are some new connections occurring in the brain, but there's also new connections throughout the brain that in fact the transmission of information throughout the brain in animals that are exercised. In fact, just simply look at a Parkinsonian animal here. All this blue is one part of the motor cortex. This is the part of the thinking cortex that's in the cerebral cortex, the top of your brain. However, these same animals who go through intensive exercise have a complete rearrangement, restructuring, new connections to the red dots here, which represents the basal ganglia. So you kind of made, without really gigantic changes in brain structure, we can actually change the connections within the brain. And I think this is incredibly exciting. And just to convince you even more, we can look at the areas of the brain, and we can look out throughout the entire brain. And this cross-sectional slice here shows us, this red here, are changes in the basal ganglia, which are changes in the region of the brain that are affected in Parkinson's disease. So again, we can get these dramatic changes in connections, as well as changes in the energetic state, how hard these areas of the brain are working with exercise. And so we can actually target these cognitive circuits and these motor circuits simultaneously. Just to make something practical, here's a practical paper we just published recently. Aaron and Giselle were the leads on this paper, but just this paper took patients with Parkinson's disease, and we just did a cross-sectional analysis of 100 people and just monitored and asked, how much do you exercise? These patients also went through intensive neuropsychological battery of tests and activity and logs and all this types of things. Very, very complex, very comprehensive study. You can look this up if you can't find it. I'm happy to send copies to people. But basically what it said, and this is common sense almost, but yet we now have the evidence for it, that the intensity of the exercise, especially using the WHO recommendation of greater than 150 minutes of moderate to intense exercise per week, shows tremendous cognitive benefit in patients with Parkinson's disease. That in fact, those patients who follow this and reach this threshold have much better cognitive health. And so again, we're seeing that thinking and moving, thinking and physical activity go hand in hand. I use the term physical activity and exercise hand in hand here. We think of exercise as like going to the gym. We think of physical activity as going to the gym or anything else you may do. And this could be gardening, this could be walking, this could be trail run, this could be bicycling, this could be carrying your groceries, this could be going up and down the stairs, this could be chasing the grandkids. It doesn't matter. That's physical activity. And we do know that anytime you can accumulate this amount of physical activity, it does not have to be in a bout of 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be in 30 minutes. It can be spread through the entire week. And if you can achieve this level of 150 minutes, you can actually demonstrate this incredible benefit in cognition. It's really, really, really quite remarkable and actually very, very exciting. I won't have a lot of time, but I just want to quickly just tell you that we're also spending a lot of time looking at the structure of the brain. And one of the things that we're looking at is the lymphatic system, how you clear material from your brain. You have this like lymphatic system, this like almost like a sewer system in your brain. And the sewer system actually changes with age, and it changes with Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. And maybe one of the reasons we may be susceptible to disease. Also, its dysfunction can be influenced by exercise and physical activity. And we have a series of papers that Aaron Donahue, our graduate student in the lab, is just now publishing that in fact show this convincingly. It's really, really quite remarkable and really quite exciting. It can be influenced by physical activity, exercise, sleep, and dysfunction of the lymphatic system, dysfunction of the perivascular space, which is part of the lymphatic system, dysfunction in that system can underscore dysfunction in cognition. They seem to correlate. And so in fact, may become a very, very important aspect of brain health. And just to let you know, we're spending a lot of time, a lot of interest in this. We have a number of different papers, but again, it's showing us the underlying mechanisms. And in fact, we can use imaging to study this. And we're doing we've done a number of cross-sectional studies. We're doing a longitudinal study now to look at this over a 2 or 3 year period and try to understand how brain changes in structure can impact changes in cognition. Very, very exciting area. And I'm happy to post my slides. You can take a look at these and some of the details. But this is really, again, more of the mechanism, the underlying evidence that in fact that brain changes. And what's really remarkable, some of these brain changes are in areas of the brain that are involved in language and thinking. And you're like, oh my gosh, that's actually very important. Not just motor sections, because it does change in the basal ganglia. We have a paper coming out on that, but changes in the thinking parts of the brain. It's very, very exciting. So again, exercise can be cognitively engaging, engages the thinking parts of your brain, and can actually improve the thinking parts of your brain. And we do know that exercise, good lifestyle aspects of sleep, diet, controlling the immune system are extremely important and can influence the structure of your brain as well as the behaviors in the brain, thinking and moving. And so we highlight some of these in a number of our studies that are ongoing in the laboratory now. Last point I want to make is that we're also looking at these non-neuron cells. And one of them is the astrocytes. And these astrocytes make up the blood-brain barrier and control what gets in your brain, how it gets in your brain, and when it gets in your brain. The astrocytes, which are in the green here, are also extremely important in feeding the neuron. In fact, they can take compounds like sugars, glucose, and maybe even lactate, and they can take it into their cellular structures, and they can actually feed it to neurons. And in fact, they can restore the structure of a neuron, and in fact, help synaptogenesis. And we do know from some studies in the lab that if we disrupt the astrocyte, shown in gray here, and if we disrupt this blood-brain barrier, or disrupt this transfer of metabolites through the astrocytes to the neurons, we can disrupt neurogenesis. We can block the benefits of exercise by targeting astrocytes. And in fact, when we increase blood flow in the brain, we can influence the circuits that are established within the brain based on targeting the type of exercise. Exercise that is cognitively engaging can influence the motor circuits. And we found that this mechanism is actually activated in those parts of the brain where you have neuroplasticity. So this is not just, again, a global change in brain. This is a change in very specific circuits. It's targeted therapeutics, basically. And last couple of points here. One is that all exercises that we do are in fact involving both aerobic as well as skill. And you can think of almost anything. Do I have to think about it, whether it's dancing and Tai Chi to treadmill running, to keeping yourself from falling off? Everything engages the brain. Everything engages the motor circuits and the thinking circuits to different degrees. And so you can begin to think of, well, what type of exercise should I do? And your physical therapist, your neurophysical therapist, your physician, your caregivers can begin to say, the type of exercise that I should do are exercises that are intense, that are specific for what I'm trying to target, such as motor and thinking. They should be challenging and they should be complex. So Tai Chi, treadmill training, dancing, boxing, amplitude training, all of these are extremely beneficial. As long as you make them a learning modality, that in fact you create goals and you begin to target not just the motor aspects of the behavior, but also the thinking, the cognitive circuits of the process that you're in. So when you're doing treadmill running, when you're doing Tai Chi, think about the body, think about what's being engaged. And in fact, this is the type of therapeutics that we see is very important. I don't have time to talk about it, but maybe next year, I'd love to talk about it, is the influence of diet. And we do know that there's a lot of things that our diet can enhance aspects of restoration of motor and cognitive behavior that in fact is as important as the exercise. And this is the mind diet, the Mediterranean diet. We're getting a lot of evidence now that in fact this is absolutely true, that in fact it does matter what you eat. So Harvey's drive-through, not too often, guys. Maybe once every couple of weeks. But get lots of greens, get lots of berries, and this is very important. And this is something that we're talking about. So I hope I've left you with some insight in the idea that exercise can enhance neuroplasticity in the brain, that cognition, thinking, and motor behavior are closely intertwined. They're interlinked. And then if we can have types of exercise that target cognition, we can enhance motor behavior. And we can enhance motor behavior by targeting cognition and vice versa. They both work hand in hand. Targeting one benefits the other. Exercise leads to new circuits in the brain. It's not neurogenesis, it's synaptogenesis. It's synaptic connections. It's strengthening and creating new connections in the brain. And what's most important is that now, even the context of Parkinson's, context of aging, the context of our youth, our children, factors of lifestyle are critical for brain health, including exercise, physical activity, diet, social interactions, stress management, and wellness. Incredibly important and critical for brain health throughout life in all stages of life. And with that, I'm going to take a breath, and I thank you, and happy to take any questions that people may have, or any comments or anything of that nature. So thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jakowec. I'm just looking at the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have a question from Angela. Thank you for sharing this fascinating information. Do you foresee that this research will help to promote funding for increased physical therapies for individuals that, sorry, it just moved on me. Help to promote funding for increased physical therapies for individuals that have been institutionalized due to progression of PD?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Dr. Giselle Patzler says to me is that says to her patients, anytime during the disease, any stage, physical activity will be beneficial. There's no time it's not beneficial. The question arises is how beneficial? Where are you in the context of the progression of the disorder? That obviously is important. But I think there's a number of issues that are raised in the question. One is that we now have a tremendous amount of evidence, molecular evidence, cellular evidence, circuit evidence in the laboratory that exercise has tremendous benefits in brain connections and brain function and brain behaviors. To a physical therapist, we have at USC a number of neurophysical therapists, and I think this gives a lot of ammunition to neurophysical therapists, or as in Canada, you call them physiotherapists, but it gives them a lot of ammunition to say why we need to do this. And we need to make it cognitively engaging. In fact, you can go online and there's a number of individuals that have developed physical therapy. And I know at UBC, they have an outstanding group that is also doing this. It's right at home for a lot of the people here, that there are really outstanding resources for physical therapy. We know the type of physical therapy. We know what should be engaged, how to do it. And I hope with this evidence-based medicine that insurance will look at this and go, yeah, we should be supporting it. Government policies will say, yes, we should support this. The other thing I want to stress, and this is a criticism that we sometimes get, is the granting agents say, well, how long do you need to exercise for? When can you stop? And when will the benefits be so good that you can stop exercise? And I'm like, well, the benefits of eating, when should you stop eating? Probably never. You should keep on eating for the rest of your life. The same thing with physical activity. You should maintain that for the rest of your life. And it becomes part of, and 20 years ago, and when we first started this, 25 years ago, when we first started this research, you could not find a patient that exercised unless they exercised before. And one friend of mine who was diagnosed at 37, him and I did marathons. That was his exercise. And 35 years later, he's still functional. He's got Parkinson's, but he's still doing marathons. So what that means is the fact that and what's changed now is that exercise, physical activity, have become the standard of care for all patients. In fact, when we write our grants, we say we'd like to have a control group of Parkinson's patients that do not exercise. We can't find them. They don't exist anymore because that's their standard of care. They all exercise. And this becomes a really, really, really important aspect of their care. So it's now the standard of care. And I think this is the way it should be. It's the standard of care of our entire lives, I think. You want to have a good brain, you gotta exercise it. And the other important point is that you don't have to go to a gym and lift 500-pound weights. You can do anything. And if you can do anything, and how do you monitor intensive exercise? How do you know you're doing intensive exercise? You can ask two things. One is, am I sweating? And if you're sweating, it's probably pretty intense. The other thing is, can you talk? If you can't talk clearly in paragraphs, you're not working hard enough. You're doing very light exercise. If you can start to talk a little bit and take a breath and a thought, and then say a few more words to your partner or who you're riding with or walking with or running with, a couple of words here and there, that's moderate. If you can't talk, you say, I just got to focus on my running. I can't converse. That's intense. So that can be your little monitor of what it is intense. And certainly in our papers, we put a lot more details, but from a patient point of view, go out and break a sweat and don't talk, and then you'll have intensive exercise. And you can do that gardening. You can do that carrying your groceries. You can do that going to, teaching your grandkid to ride a bicycle. You can do that on your own bicycling. You can do that walking up a hill. You can do that trail running. You can do that anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the context of a gym with intensive exercise. But it is good to see a physical therapist because they can give you a lot of tips to make sure you're doing it right. You don't hurt yourself. You engage all those things that you want to engage, and you can have tremendous benefits. So maybe once a month, go see your neuro PT, and the rest of the time you can keep this high intensity. Again, we haven't yet cured the disease, but I think we can modify disease progression. I really feel we have patients now in the clinic 30 years into the disorder, and they're still doing quite well, and it's really quite remarkable. So and exercise is really part of that. And hell, I feel better when I exercise. Everybody does. So, yeah. Sorry about that long answer, Elena.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for the answer. We have a verbal question from Will. So I'm just going to unmute him.
Okay.
What's going on here? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Will.
Hello. Thanks again for all the information and everything else. You mentioned something about lymphoids and stuff like that. I've also been diagnosed with CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever noticed any correlation with that because of Parkinson's or with Parkinson's?
Yeah, there's been some discussion. I don't know specifically about that, but there is some discussion regarding, cancer and Parkinson's disease. That in fact you get one or the other. But leukemias are very, very different, and I think they're very common with aging. They're also a component of the immune system, and we do know that there are immune components that are involved in many of our disorders of the brain. But we don't know if that's cause or effect. Did it cause the disease, or is it part of the disease downstream? It's sort of like rust on your car. Is a rust causing the car to run badly, or is the car is running badly and now it's going to rust? What's the cause effect? We don't know that.
Right.
So in terms of a connection, not necessarily. We don't necessarily know that there's a connection. Many of us have multiple disorders at multiple levels, and what you'd like to do is get to a level where you can control them. And I think this is very typical as we age, having multiple ailments to control. But in terms of, we're trying to understand better this whole concept of cancer and Parkinson's. And actually, one interesting link is the possibility of neuroenergetics and energetics, and thinking about how our neurons and our cells make energy. And that's actually really, really interesting. And some cancer cells can steal and make energy on their own in ways that are really quite remarkable. And we're trying to better understand that. So long story short, direct link, probably not. It's very, very uncommon. And but yet there may be some interesting, balances between them that we are trying to think about. Yeah, because we think of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all these are diseases of the body. These are not diseases of the brain. This is disease of the body. Your gut's changing, your motility is changing, you're sweating differently, your all these things are changing. Your parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system is changing, your heart rate's changing, your orthostatic hypotensions, all these things are changing. In fact, when I talk to Giselle about her patients, they don't complain about the movement. That's okay, because that Cinemet does that. They're complaining about all this other stuff, like blood pressure, like sweating, like intestinal motility. They're constipation. They're talking about all these things, which says to me that this is a disease of a system, and we need to think about you as the system. And all these things, and not just getting you to move to like finger tap faster. I mean, who cares if you can finger tap if you're constipated? And so that becomes very, very important. So it's a system. Take care of the system. And I think when you exercise, when you eat right, when you control stress, wellness, and your medications, you can control the system. And I think when you bring this is called homeostasis. Remember that word I brought up? The whole idea of homeostasis. There is systemic homeostasis of your body. And that's exactly what we'd like to tap into with exercise, with diet, with stress, because we know stress can influence the immune system. The immune system can influence the brain and thinking. It's amazing what's intertwined. It's actually quite shocking, but when things are working well, your brain works well. When things are not working well, like you're constipated, you don't think well. Well, there's a link between them. Yeah. It's really, really quite remarkable. So you can fine tune a lot of things by just doing something that helps everybody in terms of physical activity, for example. So no, thanks, Will. Appreciate your question.
We have another question here from Miles.
Mm-hmm.
Miles, go ahead. You can speak now if you like. You're on mute.
Yeah, it's like when I lecture, I usually forget mute.
Me too, I forget.
And my students will tell me about 10 minutes after.
Okay.
Well, there we go.
Okay.
Come through now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just totally awesome presentation.
Thanks.
I've had Parkinson's for 15 years now, and my activity rate has been going down. I used to be very physically active. I still walk with my wife 3 times a week. But I guess my question is, if you follow this principle and it starts to improve, and you're more active again, I guess you're getting a little selfish here. Can you now improve that level? Like, I can only go for half an hour walk, and I can't do any more. I start to slow down. Can you go beyond that? Can you set yourself goals? And the quality and duration of things? You said your friend runs a marathon still.
Yeah. Well, now he's 78, so he's doing half marathons.
Oh,
he's slowed down. So am I. We all slow down a little bit. So,
yeah. So I guess that's the type of, and your coordination and things. If you're playing like ping pong and stuff, those areas improve.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched upon a lot of important things that we think about when we think about exercise. One of them is duration. How long should I do it, and how long can I do it, and will I improve with it? I believe you will. I mean, I think we have patients, even with we do a 5K every Thursday, and we have patients doing a 5K in their walkers, using a walker. And that's really, really quite, and some of them use ski poles, and some of them are using a cane, and some of them are just on their own. And it's really, really quite remarkable. So, and like I said, it's really up to you. I mean, like I said, I've got my friend John, who's 78 and does half marathons, and he's had Parkinson's disease since he was 37. So you can engage in, and do it slowly. What's really good is to get engaged with a physical therapist, and a physical therapist, which could be at the community center. I know there's a lot of places, and I know that PDBC can hook you into a lot of wonderful community resources, and that you can find, okay, where is there a class I can go to? Actually, here's another example. We have a class that we just started in 2 things that engage a lot of physical activity and a lot of cognition, and it's designed for Parkinson's patients. You'd never guess it, of course. One is dance, and the other one's theater. And so we use these 2 modalities, and you can go to a dance class, and it's a lot of fun. And and there are some resources on Zoom, but I think live is much better. And you can begin to do that, and then you'll find, okay, well, I did my 45 minutes of dance today. I think I'm going to walk an extra kilometer, and you can do that. I think I'm going to maybe get on a bike, maybe even try a tri-wheel bike. It can really be helpful. And then you might say, well, I'm going to leave the car here. I'm going to walk to the beer store instead of, driving. You can begin to incorporate a lot of these little things, and they add up. And you don't have to. One thing that Giselle's work has shown is that you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to go 10K to get benefits. You can go 1K 10 times, and that could be any time during the day or the week. So, and you'll get the equal benefit from 10 times 1 or 1 times 10, which I think is really encouraging. And that's what I think you should try. So instead of saying, well, let's do 5K, maybe we'll do 2, and we'll do it in the morning, and maybe I'll do 1.5 in the afternoon.
Excellent.
So
Thank you very much.
5K. Yeah. No, thanks, Miles, and good luck, and keep it up. And it's
I will.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Some other questions. Do you have time?
Of course, I have time.
Okay.
I always have time for people.
Thank you so much. There's some other questions in the chat box. Let's see where we left off here. What is the best ratio of intense to moderate exercise?
So the ratio is, we think of it as a time, and the time is about 150 minutes a week. So if you can achieve the moderate to intense, sometimes we call it moderate to vigorous, but we can use both phrases. If you can achieve 150 minutes per week of moderate to intense exercise, there we see tremendous benefit. And this is the WHO recommendation, and it shows benefit cardiovascular, and then our work shows it benefit in cognition and thinking parts of the brain. And so in fact, that's what you should achieve. So it's almost like, start off by taking, keeping a diary and saying, okay, every day I'm going to write down how many minutes I do something intense. Or if you're really interested, you can talk to us or your physical therapist, or the group at UBC that may be using Fitbits. And in fact, even though Fitbits are kind of not completely accurate or completely, but they can be very informative, and they can tell you that at times with certain programs, if you want, or you can just monitor it to tell you how intense your exercise was. And so they can begin to say, how long did you spend in moderate to intensive today? And you could say, well, I was out shoveling the snow, and that was pretty intensive. And I did that for depends on where you are. Could be anywhere from 5 minutes to 2 hours. But that could be part of that, is part of physical activity. That is part of the moderate to intense exercise. You all know that when you shovel snow, that's a lot of work. And that's as important as going to the gym and lifting 100-pound weights, which is, I think, great, because it becomes a useful part of your life. Taking the stairs instead of taking an escalator, elevator, walking to your pharmacist, walking, parking on the other side of the parking lot when you go to the hospital or the clinic, walking with your neighbors and chatting with them. These can all contribute and will add up quite. And if you keep a log and a diary, it's actually quite remarkable. When you'll surprise yourself. And do it daily. Don't do it like weekly, because I forget what I did yesterday. But if you do it daily, you're really quite remarkable. So you can either do it by a log, by running it down, or you can get a Fitbit or equivalent, or a Garmin watch. That's the other one. That's what I use. That's my Garmin watch here. And those can inform you. And then you can say, oh, great, I did my 12,000 steps. Oh, I feel really good. And I did 12,000 steps, by walking fairly fast. And you can monitor all those little programs that they have that come with these Fitbits and these Garmins and these wearables, and it's really quite remarkable. And heart rate's another good way to monitor. Mine doesn't have it, but my son has his, and he monitors his heart rate. And so he knows when he hits his 192 that he's in intensive exercise. And the rest of us, if we hit 140, that can be registered in some of these more advanced Fitbits and more advanced Garmins. And so you can use that too. Or you just feel your pulse. Okay, let's go for a walk. Okay, 20 minutes. Okay, it feels pretty intense. I feel my pulse. Good. Let's do that. And make that just part of your lifestyle. I think that's really, really critical. And that's what we try to strive. And I think those patients that achieve that, strive for that, have a quality of life is greatly over those that are sedentary. So there's no question about that. It's huge. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have somebody requesting, may I receive a copy of the research paper that you were referring to?
Sure. Elena, you can just email me and we'll do two things. I can email some things to you and you can pass it on, or you can directly send their email to me. I don't hide anything because I'm trying to spread the word of this. So I don't care if people email me, but maybe did I put it on a slide? My email.
I can.
Yeah, feel free to pass it around. mjakowec@surgery.usc.edu. Absolutely happy to do that. So if you want to post that and maybe send an email and your thank you, absolutely fine. Yeah. So mjakowec at surgery akowec at surgery surgery.usc.edu. Yeah, I'm happy to send a PDF, and we got a couple new things happening. Elena, you're posting the slide, making this available recording so people can look at that again.
Yeah. Sorry, it was mjakowec@surgery.usc.au.
Edu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess that's educational. It's whatever.
Got it.
Yeah, edu.
There's lots of comments here as well. If you wanted to, excellent presentation. Thank you for your talk. Here's a question. What about just brain-focused exercise, like learning a new language, learning to play music, starting to paint or draw?
Okay, I'm going to be biased here. It might be good for you if you want to learn that language. It's sort of like what patients do. They say, well, I exercise my brain by doing Sudoku. And the question arises is that, okay, how's that beneficial? Well, it makes you really good at Sudoku. What that means is that what we're trying to do, and I showed you a picture of the rats and how they were able to do certain types of thinking by exercising. This is what we call transference. This is the transferring of benefits from one thing to another. If I were to have a take-home lesson, it would be, if you want to get cognitive benefit, you need to exercise. You need the benefit. Why do I say that? Because I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but I'll talk about it next year if you invite me. Or it's actually, we posted some of this on some of our own resources. The body communicates with the brain. It communicates with the brain through a number of very important molecules sometimes they're called exerkines. These are exercise molecules. Some of them are called myokines. They come from muscle. Adipokines, they come from fat. Leptin and ghrelin are two very important ones that are made. Insulin is one of them. There are a number of osteokines coming from blood. What that means is that you have to exercise and be physically active to get the benefits of brain to brain change. And we've shown this in our animal models. If you take an animal and you give it a certain molecule that enhances, that we know is elevated in exercise, if that animal is sedentary, we do not see the benefits of that molecule, even if it's getting into the brain. Meaning that if you don't create the template, the training circuit for that new connection, you will not see benefit. What you need to do is synergize hand in hand, exercise or physical activity plus change in circuits like thinking, then you see the benefits. So if you're doing crossword puzzles, do it on a stationary bike, I guess. If you're learning a language, like say you're trying to I'm not sure what language you're trying to do, but if you want to learn, I guess everybody in Canada knows French, so it doesn't matter. But if you want to learn, you want to learn, German, then you go jogging with a German guy or girl, and you exercise your brain as you're exercising your body, because we do know that those molecules from the body will act like fertilizer and glue for the new circuits in the brain. That we know. And I think that's important. So that's why you want to make, and if you want, and if you can't balance a crossword puzzle while you're jogging, then just make your jogging cognitively engaging. And you can go, well, I'm going to go on a trail today. I'm going to jog with some friends and socialize. I'm going to jog and maybe go through a different route. And maybe I'm going to do it the other way through my community. And these are actually very cognitively engaging. And that can be your cognitive exercise and at the same time, you're doing your physical exercise. So they go hand in hand. And so, forget the Sudoku and go trail running, go trail walking, go with some friends, go bird watching as you're running. And these are the types of things that become very cognitively engaging, which is wonderful because I'd rather do that than crossword puzzles. So yeah, hope that helped.
Lynn says, thank you for your talk on exercise. It has restored my faith in hope.
Oh, well, thank you.
And Deborah says, this was excellent. Thank you very much. Another request for the paper.
Yep,
Thank you. Vicky says, thank you for an informative session, Michael. Your enthusiasm and passion for helping those of us with PD is clearly evident. A positive slant to the subject is so refreshing, as opposed to this is how your life will be from here on. And thank you very much.
Are most of the audience Canadian?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, well, I was trained at University of Toronto, so
okay.
I had a good foundation. So that's where I grew up in the Toronto area, and then I moved to California decades ago and stayed. But my heart, I'm actually in Toronto right now, so my heart is in even BC. I even like BC. That's I love Vancouver.
Lois is asking, is 15 minutes of intense 2 times exercise as beneficial as 30 minutes at one time?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes we think of, can you do a combination of moderate or a combination of moderate plus vigorous or just vigorous? There actually is a formula for that. So if you were doing just vigorous, you could actually cut that down to about 100 minutes. But most of us, it's moderate because we may slow down, we may stop, we may talk, we may do other things, but a mixture of the two. So often what we do is we just kind of think of it as moderate to vigorous, because that's kind of typical of what we do anyway. Even if you're riding your bike or running up hills, you may slow down at certain parts and become moderate, but you'll add those up. So you're absolutely right. And the other thing is having these little bouts, these little bursts of intensity are very good. So you might say, well, let's walk to the top of that hill and we're not going to talk. We're just going to march up that hill. And that can be very, very beneficial. And actually, when you increase intensity of any exercise, you're actually increasing the learning modality. You're increasing your cognitive engagement, and you're increasing the challenge. All those factors that we know are very important for motor learning and for cognitive learning. So you're doing exactly that. You might say, it's like, you go ice skating, let's say, let's do it backwards, or let's do it forward faster, or let's shoot the puck or shoot the basketball. Let's do it from a little bit further away. Let's make it a little harder. Or let's run up this hill, or let's run to that stop sign. Make it a little harder. Those are extremely good and very important. And any good trainer will tell you that that's what you should do. Challenge yourself. Make it a challenge. Every day is a little challenge. Another walk around the block, another pathway, another, whatever you can do to mix it up is great. Which I think is wonderful, because we used to think you had to do a certain type of exercise, and there's so many studies out there comparing, one type of exercise versus another. They're nice to know, but it all comes down to, can you make it a learning modality? Can you challenge your brain? Can you make it complex? These are the things that all of those different modalities share. And if you don't like boxing, you don't have to do boxing. You can do Tai Chi. Okay, wonderful. If you like riding a stationary bike or even a regular bike, go. That's your modality. Find your modality and make it increase duration, increase intensity, increase complexity. You can do it in whatever modality you want to choose. Yeah.
Catherine's asking, can you suggest some whole body vibration exercises?
Vibration, it's not the vibration. Sometimes it's the challenge. Remember, we talked about cognition and moving through space, and your body, you have to control 600 muscles. A couple of things are happening with vibration therapy. One is that it challenges the disruption of your body. So now your body is thinking, oops, something's happening here that I'm really weird with. I better start repairing my center of gravity, because I may fall down if this vibration keeps pushing me in this direction. If you see what I mean, this is a challenge to your homeostasis, because we don't vibrate all the time. So you have that type of center of gravity, or of posture. Sometimes these vibrations are done on a platform of some kind. So you're challenged for your in that particular fashion. The other thing is you're moving muscles and you're moving bones and you're moving fat. Those give off these molecules that we talked about earlier in terms of exerkines. So that's where that's coming from. I would probably mix it up. If you like the vibration therapy and you think you're getting some benefit from it, even massage, people enjoy massage and get benefit from it. You're moving muscles. I mean, why? It's just another modality. And so I would see benefit. But again, mix it up, do a few other things. If you feel good after the vibration therapy, then you might say, okay, let's go for a 5K walk on Saturday. Let's see how we feel. Mix it up. And I think you'll begin to see, again, transference, that in fact, the benefits from one form of exercise can transfer into benefits in other behaviors that you have. And that's the high benefit. Variety is very important. And that's part of complexity. Good question.
Vicky's asking, what's your thoughts on consumption of dairy products?
Depends on what they are. So, diet is huge. And I mentioned, and I'm happy to send some articles that we've been thinking of, and we've been reading, or we've been writing on the Mediterranean diet. In fact, there is something called the MIND diet, was a combination of the Mediterranean diet, which we know classically as Italian Greek, and the DASH diet, which is a diet for atherosclerosis and blood pressure. And together they're called the MIND diet. And Elena, I'm happy to send some of these primary articles to you, because I think this is going to become a very common question for patients and lifestyle and just general health. So in fact, dairy itself, what I think is really the problem that we have, and I'm trying to been researching this for a while because I teach a couple courses and I discuss this. A lot of the problems is with sugar and too much refined sugar. So if you had to modify one thing in your diet, I would alter the amount of intake of simple sugars, high fructose corn syrups, for example, white sugars, simple, glucose, fruit, especially fructose. I would limit those. I would get my carbohydrates from potatoes, for example, and more complex sources, more complex carbohydrates. There's nothing wrong with fat. And if anything, Parkinson's patients need to gain weight. And in fact, I don't even think you should diet in the sense of fat, for example, because we know your brain is 50% fat, so you need those. And we do a great job of handling that. But unfortunately, some of our metabolism, our brain can be fooled by sugars. So I'm beginning to change. I think a lot of people are changing that. In fact, higher fat, high protein, very low carbohydrates are actually probably the most beneficial. And the MIND diet is now being targeted in a lot of research in a lot of different groups for a lot of different disorders, not just Alzheimer's, but also aging and cognition. And we're finding that the MIND diet can be very, very beneficial. What's the MIND diet? Glass of wine, a green salad, and blueberries. And if you like cheese, goat cheese, and a little bit of mozzarella. I mean, Italy's half mozzarella, so that there's your dairy. So that's in there. So I think, again, it's just really staying away from processed food, staying away. Giselle tells her patients, never have another soda. It don't bother. Every now and then we have a rum and Coke, okay, but don't drink it as a regular. Don't drink a lot of our juices. Go for the waters. Go for these other things. Try to reduce some of the sugars that are in your diet. And there's so much in processed food. And in fact, let me tell you, we have a couple of patients on a pilot study we just did, and we had 3 patients, Parkinson's, and one of them was a regular exerciser, really good. But to him, he thinks that Wendy's hamburgers is actually good food. And so he would go there a lot. And so what we did was we then did this 8-week program and changed his diet to the Mediterranean diet and gave him all these points for greens and berries and all these types of things. And he began to change his diet. And in fact, I mean, it's unscientific right now. It's an N of 3, but these patients with Parkinson's were showing a 4-point change on their MOCA, which is the Montreal cognitive testing exam. 4 points out of 30 just in 8 weeks with diet. Now, I don't know if that translates to brain changes, but it certainly translates to better thinking. And I think that's really quite remarkable. So that tells us diet is huge in terms of our thinking and moving. So I would really begin to look at the Mind diet, the Mediterranean diets as a real focus of what you're doing. Probiotics, get some sauerkraut or kapusta, eat a pickle. There's your probiotics, and those can be really, really important. Your microbiome, your microbiota, all those things that are in your gut, extremely important. And we know that they're fundamental to the health of the brain. So they all can be influenced. Low dairy, Dairy Queen maybe once a month. How's that? We'll let you go out and get a good milkshake, and I think that's absolutely fine. So
we had a couple of requests actually I don't know how you feel about posting the research paper along with the slides.
Absolutely. This is the public domain. I work for you guys. You tell me what you want. You guys are the reason we do this. I'm happy. And Elena, if you want me to send you some reduced size PDFs, they are public domain, so that's not a problem. And you're not using them for profit, so it's absolutely appropriate. And I can send you a bunch of papers between now and my return to LA in the end of the week. And if you want to post some of those in your website, or if you think some patients have questions, or caregivers or families have questions, absolutely. And we try to have other references to it, and absolutely that would be, love to help. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. We have one last question from Mike. What about the latest study that recommends only 2 drinks of alcohol in a week?
Well, first of all, you got to define what you mean by 2 drinks. And if I talk to my Ukrainian friends, a 750 ml bottle is a drink. But no, the Mediterranean diet really says, and I think this is absolutely fine. And there's a lot of evidence that it's not harmful if you have 1 good glass of red wine per day, not a problem. So, and in fact, there's more benefit from a glass of red wine because of the components that are in it. There's a number of things that are found in the skin of the red grape, and that ends up in wine. And so a nice Cabernet, and I know British Columbia has got some good wine country out there. So take a little trip, or buy some local Pinot Noirs or Burgundies or Cabernets, as long as it's red, and 6 to 8 ounces a day, no problem. And if anything, you will have benefit from that. I would probably reduce other forms of alcohol, definitely. Things like vodkas and stuff like that. But again, moderation. So, okay.
All right.
Way to go.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jakowec. Thank you so much for such a fascinating presentation. So much information for us, and thank you so much for spending so much time answering the questions.
Oh, thank you. Like I said at the beginning, we do it because of the patients. And even though one thing that we do in our lab is we take our students who are working at the bench, and they spend a day or 2 or so with Giselle in the clinic, and when she's got a clinic day, and they see the patients firsthand, and that this is motivation, and this is shows our work is important. We really love that, and that's so fundamental to us. Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation.
Really
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure to have you with us. So thank you all for attending and all of your great questions. We will see you at our next talks in the Global Symposium series on March 22nd with Dr. Ted Dawson, speaking on new research, exercise hormones and future disease-modifying therapies for Parkinson's disease. And on March 29th, Dr. Daniel Korko speaking on impact of exercise on Parkinson's disease progression. See you then, and have a good afternoon. Okay. I'll leave this on for a bit for those of you who want to write down Dr. Jakowec's email. It is in the chat box. I did type it in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just look at the, you still hear me, Elena?
You should really read the chat box because there are so many wonderful comments.
Yeah, no, I have it up right now. I'm just looking at, someone mentioned, someone I know, Laura Mishley, and her diet nutrition. She's a big advocate of diet, huge. I don't know if you need to do a PD summer school, but if it gives you an excuse to get away and maybe to interact directly, but again, she's a big advocate of the Mediterranean diet, and that's huge. And give you an excuse to go down to Seattle, I guess, if you want. So, yeah.
Ooh, it's kind of a compliment for me too in here.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks,
Well,
Alana. What a gift you organized for us today.
Yeah,
Michael is brilliant.
yeah, well, it's a team. I represent one of a big team, and it's a great team. We're very proud of it. And I think in Canada, you got some great Parkinson's researchers, and you've got some great support groups, and I've really been impressed. And the group at BC has always impressed me, and they're good friends.
Oh, well, that's so nice to hear.
Yeah, I really like what they do. John Stossel has been a great supporter of our work, and was one of the first to actually believe it. 20 years ago, we got a lot of heat. People didn't believe it, that you could actually change the brain without changing dopamine, and he did the same thing in humans and showed it, 15 years later. So yeah. And I'm trying to write some things for non-scientists, and so I'll keep you in mind when I get closer to having something to circulate, and then to give to
That
patients.
would be great, and we would love to have you back and speak for us. So
no, I'll be honored. Yeah, and actually, I know Dawson and Corcus quite well, so if they forget to quote me, make sure you say 25 years ago, Dr. Jakowec showed this. So yeah, that's pretty funny. So that's great. Now that you got a great group of speakers. Yeah, great questions. So.
Well, great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Dr. Jakowec, and we will keep in touch. And I'll look out for your.
Thanks, Alana. Thanks, Doc.
Okay, no, thank you, Miles. Appreciate it. Wonderful.
Great.
Yeah. Go have your glass of wine.
I will.
And go for a walk.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Elena. And I'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay. Have a good day. Stay warm.
Enjoy the snow.
Oh, yes, I am. Okay. Bye.
Bye.